The fourth counterattack has erupted with calculated fury. Hundreds of missiles and drones launched from Iranian territory and Allied positions in Lebanon are now pouring down on Israel in a relentless, unyielding storm. The skies over Tel Aviv, once the proud symbol of technological supremacy and perceived untouchable power, are now illuminated not by city lights but by the burning glow of a sea of fire. The night sky has erased the boundary between heaven and hell. Emergency sirens no longer wail in short, distinct bursts. They pulse continuously, an unbroken, droning heartbeat of an unprecedented nightmare that has settled over the population. Here is the shocking reality of this new phase of conflict. Iran is not flooding the sky with tens of thousands of indiscriminate missiles. They do not need to resort to such blind volume. Instead, through surgical waves of ballistic missiles and swarms of cheap, expendable drones, they are forcing Israel's multi-layered, vaunted defense systems into a state of critical overdrive. Each Iranian projectile, whether a sophisticated missile or a propeller-driven drone, costs a fraction of the interceptors used to shoot it down, sometimes as little as 1/10 the price. Yet Israel is burning through hundreds of millions of dollars in a single night, not to gain ground or achieve victory, but merely to stay alive and keep the urban centers from collapsing into chaos. This is not just another exchange of fire. This is history unfolding in real time. The precise moment the iron curtain of Israeli defense begins to audibly crack under the weight of Iran's cold, calculated war of attrition. Tonight we expose the brutal truth behind this escalating confrontation. How is Iran systematically exhausting Israel's most advanced defenses using weapons that cost pocket change by comparison? Why are thousands of Israel's best minds, doctors, engineers, and technology experts, quietly fleeing the country in what may represent the largest brain drain in its modern history? And while political rhetoric in Washington boasts about finishing the job and restoring strength, why is the United States forced to send multi-billion-dollar aircraft carriers and emergency ammunition shipments just to prop up an ally that finds itself struggling to protect its own skies? From military attrition to economic collapse, from the fog of information warfare to the slow, creeping death of national morale, we will reveal how the rules of modern war are being rewritten in real time. The real story unfolding beneath the sirens and the smoke is far more shocking than the headlines suggest. The fourth counterattack did not begin with a warning shot or a gradual escalation. It erupted as a calculated multi-directional storm. Hundreds of ballistic missiles and explosive drones launched simultaneously from Iranian territory and from positions across the northern border. The sky over northern Israel and the coastal plains turned into a battlefield of intersecting fire trails, vapor trails, and thunderous explosions. Within minutes, the dense network of warning sirens across Tel Aviv, Haifa, and surrounding suburban cities screamed without pause, blending into a single terrifying note. This was no longer the sporadic rocket fire of past conflicts. This was a full-scale, coordinated saturation attack specifically designed to overwhelm Israel's defense architecture from multiple directions and varying altitudes at the exact same moment. What makes this assault particularly dangerous is its rhythm. Iran and its allies are not trying to deliver one decisive knockout blow that could be absorbed and retaliated against. Instead, they are maintaining a relentless tempo, wave after wave, night after night. Israeli officials have admitted that in recent days alone, over 400 projectiles were launched in a single major barrage. While official statements claim an interception rate above 85%, the reality on the ground tells a more nuanced and devastating story. Multiple impacts have been recorded in dense urban areas, with fires raging uncontrolled in residential zones and critical infrastructure taking hits that degrade the daily function of the state. Let us look at the cold, unforgiving mathematics of this war of attrition. Each interceptor fired by the country's primary defense system costs between $40,000 and $100,000 per unit. In stark contrast, many of the Iranian missiles and drones used in these saturation attacks cost as little as $5,000 to $20,000 per unit. This means that Israel is often forced to spend 5, 10, sometimes even 20 times more just to neutralize a single incoming threat. In one night of intense fighting, it is estimated that Israel expended over $200 million in defense munitions alone. That is not a sustainable burn rate, not even for a wealthy nation propped up by continuous foreign aid. The defense shield, once hailed globally as an impenetrable technological miracle, is now being exposed to its greatest and most fundamental test. Designed primarily for short-range, predictable rockets, it struggles against a mixed barrage of high-angle ballistic missiles, terrain-hugging cruise missiles, and low-flying suicide drones that barely register on radar. When dozens of projectiles approach from different altitudes and angles simultaneously, the system's computational capacity becomes overloaded. Decision-making time for human operators shrinks to mere seconds. Some missiles inevitably get through, and each successful penetration chips away not just at concrete and steel, but at the myth of absolute security that has underpinned national morale for a generation. The role of Allied forces to the north has been equally critical. From southern Lebanon, precision-guided munitions and swarms of cheap drones have been launched, forcing Israel to stretch its air defense resources thin across two active fronts. This multi-axis pressure is deliberate and strategic. While Israeli jets strike back at launch sites, new firing positions appear elsewhere within hours. It is a deadly, exhausting game of whack-a-mole, where the attacker holds the initiative and dictates the pace of the defender's response. Beyond the immediate battlefield, the strategic impact is spreading like a stain. Key roads leading into the major metropolitan hub have been temporarily closed due to falling debris and unexploded ordnance. Power outages have hit several districts following strikes near energy facilities and high-tension lines. Emergency services are operating at maximum capacity, with hospitals treating both physical trauma from shrapnel and blast waves, as well as a rising tide of psychological trauma from the unrelenting stress. The military has mobilized additional reserve units, but the constant state of high alert is already draining manpower reserves and fraying morale at the edges. This is classic attrition warfare at its most sophisticated and modern. Iran does not need every single missile to hit its target. It only needs to force Israel to keep responding at an exhausting, economically punishing pace. Every successful interception is a tactical victory for Israel, but a strategic win for Iran, because each one depletes precious stockpiles and inflates defense budgets beyond what the treasury can sustain indefinitely. The longer this tempo continues, the more Israel's technological advantage is neutralized by sheer persistence and the brutal reality of cost asymmetry. What we are witnessing is a fundamental shift in modern conflict. Traditional ideas of superior firepower are being challenged and overcome by superior sustainability. Iran and its allies have turned the battlefield into an economic and psychological pressure cooker. They are not fighting to conquer territory in a single day. They are fighting to make every single day more expensive, more tiring, and more demoralizing for their opponent. As the fourth counterattack continues to unfold with no clear end in sight, one question echoes louder than the sirens. How many more nights of this intensity can the defense systems and the economy endure before the cracks become irreparable fractures? Now we must move from the battlefield to the laboratory and the factory floor, because in this war, technology is not just a tool used by soldiers, it is the battlefield itself. Iran has built one of the most formidable asymmetric arsenals in modern history. While Israel relies on cutting-edge Western systems backed by billions in foreign aid and technology transfer, Iran has mastered the art of self-reliance under the pressure of decades of sanctions. The result is a deadly combination of quantity, ingenuity, and devastating cost efficiency. Let us start with the numbers that expose the stark imbalance. In recent counterattacks, Iran and its partners have unleashed waves of ballistic missiles, including advanced solid-fuel variants and upgraded legacy designs. These are complemented by hundreds of low-cost drones modeled after commercially available technology. Estimates from the latest barrages show a capacity to launch between 400 and 600 ballistic missiles over short periods, often in coordinated salvos of 40 to 50 at a time. The real shock lies in the economics of production. A basic loitering munition or one-way attack drone costs as little as $20,000 to $50,000. Many short-range ballistic missiles fall in the $100,000 to $500,000 range. Even more advanced medium-range missiles, capable of striking deep into territory, rarely exceed $1 to $2 million per unit. Now compare that to the defender's costs. The famous interceptors for short-range defense cost between $40,000 and $100,000 each, sometimes reaching $150,000 when factoring in operational and battery maintenance expenses. Mid-range interceptors used to catch heavier rockets cost around $1 million each. The high-altitude exo-atmospheric interceptors designed to stop long-range threats are far more expensive, reportedly costing up to $3 or $4 million per shot in some estimates. When advanced foreign terminal defense systems are brought in to assist in guarding the skies, each interceptor can exceed $12 million. This creates one of the most lopsided cost equations in military history. Iran can launch 10 or even 20 projectiles for the price of a single high-end Israeli or foreign interceptor, and they do not need all of them to hit their targets. They only need enough to saturate the system, force constant launches, and drain the stockpiles that took years and billions to accumulate. But Iran's advantage goes far beyond mere price. Their missile technology has evolved rapidly in terms of accuracy and evasion capability. New hypersonic weapons represent a genuine technological leap, claimed to reach speeds of Mach 13 to 15. These weapons feature maneuverable re-entry vehicles or hypersonic glide vehicles that can change trajectory both outside and inside the atmosphere. They zigzag, alter course unpredictably, and approach targets from unexpected angles, making traditional intercept calculations based on ballistic arcs extremely difficult and often useless. Even if the exact performance numbers are debated by Western analysts, the core message is clear and demonstrable. These missiles compress reaction time to almost nothing. Radar detection, command decisions, and interceptor launch windows shrink dramatically. A missile traveling at hypersonic speed gives air defense crews mere seconds to respond. One small delay or miscalculation, and the projectile penetrates the shield. Iran has also perfected the swarm tactic and the layered attack profile. They mix cheap drones with ballistic missiles in a carefully choreographed sequence. The cheap drones fly low and slow, forcing the defenders to reveal radar positions and expend precious interceptors on targets that are often not worth the cost of the missile used to stop them. Once the defenses are engaged and partially depleted, faster and more sophisticated ballistic missiles follow in waves, exploiting the gaps created by the saturation. This layered approach turns quantity into a form of quality all its own. What makes this arsenal truly impressive is how it was built. Under intense international sanctions that were meant to cripple its industry, Iran developed an indigenous missile and drone sector that produces solid fuel rockets, advanced guidance systems, and mobile launchers capable of rapid dispersal and survivability. Many components use commercially available technology cleverly adapted for military use, a masterclass in resourceful engineering. In contrast, the defending systems, while technologically superior on paper, depend heavily on expensive imported components and constant resupply from the United States. Every major barrage forces Israel to seek emergency interceptor shipments. Even with billions in annual aid, production lines abroad cannot keep pace with the rate of depletion in a prolonged high-intensity conflict. This is not accidental. Iran has deliberately designed its doctrine around attrition through asymmetry. They understand that a superpower's high-tech weapons become financial liabilities when forced to fight against low-cost, high-volume threats. Each expensive interceptor fired is not just a financial loss on a spreadsheet, it is one fewer round available for the next, potentially larger wave. Stockpiles that took years to build can be exhausted in a matter of weeks. Moreover, Iran's weapons are built for sustainability. Their factories operate deep underground, dispersed across a vast country. Mobile launchers can fire and immediately relocate, making them difficult and fleeting targets for retaliatory airstrikes. Production rates for drones and certain missiles are reportedly in the hundreds per month, allowing Iran to replenish losses far faster than high-end interceptors can be manufactured and shipped. The psychological dimension is equally powerful. Every time a hypersonic threat appears on radar, commanders must decide in an instant whether to expend a precious high-altitude interceptor or risk impact. That hesitation itself becomes a weapon. The mere threat of such strikes forces constant readiness, wearing down crews, radars, and command systems around the clock. This technological confrontation reveals a deeper truth about modern warfare. Superiority is no longer measured only by how advanced your weapons are, but by how smartly and sustainably you use them. Iran has turned necessity into invention. Sanctions that were meant to cripple its military industry instead forced innovation in asymmetric capabilities. As the fourth counterattack continues, the multi-layer defense once considered nearly invincible is being forced into a new and uncomfortable reality. It is no longer fighting isolated threats from non-state actors. It is fighting a calculated, relentless machine designed to exhaust both its technology and its treasury. While Iran orchestrates this masterclass in asymmetric attrition, the United States finds itself in an increasingly awkward and expensive position, playing the role of the world's most expensive bodyguard. In response to the escalating fourth counterattack, Washington has deployed one of the largest naval concentrations in the region in decades. Multiple supercarriers and their accompanying strike groups are now operating in the waters of the eastern Mediterranean and the surrounding seas. These floating fortresses cost roughly $2.5 million per day each to operate, accounting for fuel, crew salaries, maintenance, aircraft sorties, and logistics for thousands of personnel. That is millions of dollars being burned every single day, just to keep these assets in position as a deterrent and a defensive shield. With multiple carrier groups deployed simultaneously, the financial burn rate is staggering before a single shot is fired in direct defense of Israel. This is not a small commitment. It represents one of the most significant force postures in the region since the major ground invasions of the early 2000s. Guided missile destroyers, cruisers, and advanced stealth fighter squadrons accompany these carriers. The message from Washington is loud and clear. The United States will not allow its closest ally to fall. But the subtext is far more revealing. Israel, despite its sophisticated military and reputation for power, cannot handle this level of sustained pressure without the direct massive intervention of the world's foremost superpower. The political leadership in the United States now finds itself in a contradictory spotlight. On one hand, massive military support has been authorized, including emergency shipments of interceptors and the deployment of these billion-dollar naval assets. On the other hand, public complaints have been voiced about the burden, criticizing European allies for not doing enough, and expressing frustration that other partners are unwilling to share the load. The rhetoric has alternated between declarations of imminent strength, claiming the situation is very close to being over and touting total and complete victory, and subtle admissions that the United States is once again being asked to carry the heaviest weight. While statements are made about making money from reconstruction and pushing for talks in far-flung capitals, the reality on the water tells a different story. The United States is pouring hundreds of millions of dollars per week into a conflict where the opponent spends fractions of that amount to keep the pressure high and the attrition constant. This deployment exposes the limits of American power in the modern era. The United States can project overwhelming force with its navy and air power, but it cannot magically solve the fundamental asymmetry of the conflict. Iran does not need to sink a carrier or win a conventional battle. It only needs to continue its calculated waves of cheap missiles and drones, forcing both the United States and its ally to keep spending at unsustainable rates. Meanwhile, the broader geopolitical picture is shifting. By committing such visible and expensive assets to one theater, Washington is signaling to the entire world, especially to rivals in the Pacific, that its resources are stretched and its focus is divided. Every carrier tied down in the Middle East is one less available for the Western Pacific. Every dollar spent on interceptors is one less dollar for other strategic priorities. The administration has also faced growing domestic questions about the financial viability of this support. While baseline annual military aid is already high, emergency supplemental packages since the broader conflicts began have pushed the total far higher, with tens of billions in direct military support approved in recent years, much of it specifically for missile defense and ammunition replenishment. Critics within the country are beginning to ask, how long can the United States afford to be the unlimited financier for a conflict that shows no signs of ending quickly? On the diplomatic front, attempts have been made to balance military posturing with talk of ceasefires and negotiations. Yet the selective nature of any proposed agreements, where certain areas or actors are conveniently excluded, only highlights the fragile and tactical use of diplomacy. America finds itself trapped between supporting an ally's security needs and the growing realization that unlimited backing comes with unlimited and potentially untenable costs. This is the harsh geopolitical reality. The world's sole superpower is being drawn into a prolonged war of attrition, not of its choosing, against an adversary that has spent years preparing exactly for this scenario. Iran's strategy does not aim for direct confrontation with the United States military. It aims to make the United States bleed economically and politically while exposing the limits of its global alliances. The deployment of these carriers may provide temporary reassurance, but it also sends a clear message to the rest of the world. Even the mightiest military machine has its breaking points when forced to defend against low-cost, high-volume persistence. Technology and missiles can destroy buildings, but only the human spirit decides whether a nation survives or slowly collapses from within. This is where the fourth counterattack has struck its deepest and most dangerous blow. Not at military bases or defense batteries, but at the will and cohesion of Israeli society itself. The numbers are sobering and rarely discussed openly. Since the escalation began in late 2023 through the present year, Israel has experienced one of the largest brain drains in its modern history. Conservative estimates place the number of citizens who have permanently left the country at between 90,000 and 110,000 people. These are not poor or vulnerable citizens fleeing temporary danger. These are the educated elite: doctors, engineers, scientists, technology entrepreneurs, and highly skilled professionals who form the backbone of a modern economy. Hospitals are feeling the pain acutely. Over 950 doctors have applied for or already received licenses to practice abroad, with more than 500 choosing not to return. Entire departments in major hospitals now operate with severe staff shortages, just as the demand for trauma and emergency care peaks. In the technology sector, the crown jewel of the economy, thousands of engineers and PhD holders have relocated to Europe, the United States, and Canada. Many cite the same reason: they no longer believe the current trajectory is sustainable for their families or their careers. This is not panic evacuation. This is a calculated, quiet exodus of the very people who keep the country running. When a top researcher leaves a position at an elite firm, they do not just take their expertise, they take future innovation, investor confidence, and tax revenue with them. When an experienced trauma surgeon departs, the entire medical system loses capacity to handle both war injuries and routine care. Meanwhile, inside the country, the social fabric is fraying. Anti-war protests that once remained on the margins have grown louder and more widespread, spreading from central squares into residential neighborhoods and even some traditionally conservative communities. Even within the ultra-Orthodox population, long considered a pillar of discipline and demographic growth, cracks are appearing. Reports show increasing resistance to military service among younger men, with some openly questioning the endless cycle of conflict and its human cost. This erosion of will is far more dangerous than any single missile strike. A nation can rebuild destroyed buildings and repair damaged infrastructure with enough money and time, but restoring high-quality human capital takes decades. Once confidence collapses, the chain reaction becomes extremely difficult to reverse. Those who remain begin to question their own future. Uncertainty spreads. Investment dries up. The silent departure of talent accelerates into a self-reinforcing cycle. Compare this reality with the other side. On the Iranian and Allied side, the fighting spirit remains remarkably resilient. Despite years of sanctions, isolation, and repeated airstrikes, both Iran and its allied forces continue to display high levels of motivation, rooted in national pride, ideological conviction, and a clear sense of defending sovereignty. Missile crews and allied fighters operate with discipline and patience, knowing they are part of a long-term strategy rather than a desperate gamble. They do not rely on multi-billion-dollar foreign carriers or emergency aid packages. Their strength comes from internal resilience, the willingness to endure hardship, absorb losses, and maintain operational tempo over months and years. This is the power of fighting for a cause perceived as existential and just rather than depending on external patronage. Israel, by contrast, increasingly appears trapped in a dependent relationship. It possesses advanced technology and a strong conventional military, but its long-term survival in this new war of attrition depends heavily on continuous foreign financial, military, and diplomatic support. When that support is questioned, even rhetorically, anxiety rises. The realization that even the world's superpower has limits creates a subtle but profound psychological crack. The contrast could not be starker. One side fights with homegrown weapons, homegrown strategy, and deep ideological commitment. The other side, despite its wealth and technology, increasingly fights with borrowed time, borrowed money, and eroding domestic consensus. This is the true nature of modern hybrid warfare. Missiles damage the body, but sustained pressure damages the soul of a nation, its confidence, its unity, and its belief in a viable future. When doctors leave hospitals, when engineers abandon startups, when parents question whether to raise children in a country under constant threat, the foundations begin to tremble. What began as a regional conflict has now transcended borders, becoming a defining moment in the reshaping of the global order. This is no longer simply a Middle East war. It is a live demonstration of how the post-Cold War unipolar moment is quietly dying. For decades, the United States and its allies promoted a vision of a single dominant power enforcing international rules through military supremacy, technological edge, and economic leverage. That model is now facing its most serious stress test in generations. The fourth counterattack and the broader confrontation have exposed the structural weaknesses of this system with brutal clarity. First, the economic reality is inescapable. The United States is currently spending hundreds of millions of dollars per week directly and indirectly to sustain the defense.